Ooh, there are some people in here. Can you guys hear me, whoever's in here? Awesome, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Renee. Allie, hello, good evening. So fingers crossed we don't have any more missing files this week. We'll wait just a couple more minutes to see if some more people trickle in, and then we'll get started. Beginning will be kind of boring. We'll recap who I am, and just some notes about tonight, so it won't be a huge issue. All right, I guess I'll just actually get started with just a quick recap for those of you who might not have seen last week's. My name is Sean Pearson. I am a speech-language pathologist practicing in Calgary. For the last about 5 years, I've worked primarily with students with autism, but a variety of other diagnoses as well, such as cerebral palsy and Rett syndrome and Down syndrome and various other communication challenges, as well as we talked about last week, a lot of late talkers. Jennifer, is anyone else having trouble accessing the feed? Yeah. And I think last week there was actually someone who was having some difficulties too. In that event, everything should be posted one way or another after this, so you will be able to hopefully just download it right away. It could be a codex or something that you might need. You could try refreshing, try leaving and coming back in, seeing if that works. Yeah, I don't think there was a solution for the person who was having difficulties last week either. You could try a different browser too to see if you have a little bit more success like that. Okay, yeah, so as I was saying, Sean Pearson, same person as last week. I do, as I mentioned last week, I do have a bit of a specialty in working in augmentative and alternative communication as well as assistive technology. Tonight I won't be talking a ton about assistive technology. Mostly what I do with that is with the school, more of a school-age population, elementary education type thing. So I won't be talking too much about that, and we'll stick more to the AAC stuff. And so, much like last week, please feel free to comment as we go along. Hopefully these internet issues subside and get a little bit better. Yes, as Amy said, I love talking to people when they probably can't access the feed. So today we'll focus more on the AAC part. Feel free to type in any comments as we go on. I'll do my best to address them right away. As we said last week, try and hold questions until the end, if possible. And remember, try and keep questions I think we're dropping people, so hopefully, hopefully everything's going to be okay. Keep questions until the end. Try and keep them as general as possible. I can't really, for confidentiality reasons, answer specific questions. And another thing, this is a giant disclaimer for this, and I'm sure I'll mention this as we go on. I'm not going to be making any specific recommendations in terms of apps or communication devices, just because that is something, oh yeah, it seems like Sherry's having that problem too. This is really something that you need to do in consultation with an SLP, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So that's my little disclaimer for this. Yeah, Sherry can't hear it either. Okay, so to get started, I just want to give you guys a quick definition of what augmentative and alternative communication is, because that will help put things in context for us. I'm just going to read it here, and this comes from ASHA, which is the American Speech and Hearing Association. It's a pretty big governing body, a pretty big body. Augmentative and alternative communication, AAC, includes all forms of communication other than oral speech that are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. So as you can hear from that definition, it's a really broad definition of things. And coming out of that, one of the biggest questions I get asked is, who can use AAC? And really the answer for that is everybody. It is known, it's widely known that individuals who are nonverbal are the primary users of AAC. However, that's just the alternative part of augmentative and alternative communication. The augmentative part is it can be used to augment communication. And for that, you're looking at, when we're looking at children, you're looking at kids who might be verbal and who might be minimally verbal, who might be verbal, who might be hard to understand. Those kids totally do benefit from AAC. In fact, we all use AAC on a daily basis. You guys can't see me now, but I'm talking with my hands under the table a little bit. That's a form of augmenting my communication. When you do gestures and pointing, you're augmenting your communication. You know, a lot of times with these little guys, especially when they're verbal, we do those basic baby signs, not sign language, but those baby basic signs like more and all done, like those types of things. That's augmenting communication, so that's AAC. When we draw, when we write, that's AAC as well. So really, everybody augments their communication, and all those things are definitely considered AAC. That being said, as an SLP, I primarily use AAC with what we consider complex communicators. And complex communicators are basically, it's a term that seems to be gaining some traction, but what it is, it's anyone, a complex communicator is anyone who can't get their wants and needs met through their current form of communication. So as you can see, anyone who's nonverbal, that's kind of their communication, so they can't get their wants and needs met that way. And we would label them a complex communicator. For the most part, those are the types of students that I do deal with, and children I deal with. So before we get into the different types of AAC and how we use AAC and give you some strategies, one thing I really do want to try and do is preemptively catch some of those questions that I frequently receive as an AAC specialist and someone who works in AAC a lot. One of the main ones that I do get is, will AAC stop my child from talking? Will it hinder them from talking? And this answer is a very precise and very straightforward no. It will not have any negative effect whatsoever on their ability to talk. There have actually been a number of really good studies and a lot of research on this, and all the research comes out that it has no negative impact. In fact, it actually does have a positive impact on their ability to communicate. It may have a positive impact on their ability to orally communicate. The main reason behind this is, we talked about last week, the importance of modeling. Anytime you're using any form of AAC, and that could be low-tech, paper-based, or some sort of high-tech device, you're getting models. You're getting so many models from it. And that's the main reason, because they're getting so much more modeling and they're hearing so much more language by doing it. So that is definitely another big question. Something else that came up last week, and I wrote down just to make sure we can address, and I addressed it a little bit last week, but I definitely want to address it this week, is the difference between PECs and visuals. And PECs is definitely a form of AAC. It's used, I'm sure it sounds like people are familiar with PECs. But the important thing about PECs to keep in mind is that it is a communication system. In fact, PEX is an acronym for Picture Exchange Communication System. And that system at the end really is the key, because that's all it is. Yes, it uses visuals, but you could definitely use visuals for a variety of other communication systems and communication methods. In fact, pretty much everything we're going to discuss here tonight uses visuals in some variety. So really the way to look at it is that PEX, which is a system for initiation and requesting, for the most part, it has started to add in some other stuff as there's been more research on expanding your vocabulary, which will be something we'll talk about tonight. The way to look at it is that PEX are basically visuals, but not all visuals are PEX. Is kind of the way to look at it like that. And keeping in mind something that a lot of people refer to any kind of picture symbol as a PEC, at least where I'm, in Calgary, I hear that a lot, right? People just refer to any picture symbol as a PEC. That's not the case. That's a picture symbol. A PEC is specifically for the PECS program. So that really is important to keep in mind here. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're thinking about visuals, visuals really are just a picture representation of something. And it can be anything. All it is just a picture representation, right? Whether you're doing a stick figure, whether you're doing a board maker image, PCS, which is usually what PECs are made of, whether you're doing a digital photo, it's a picture representation of something. You can use them for a variety of purposes, right? So you can use those visuals for AAC, for augmentative and alternative communication, which I'm going to show you guys some examples, and we'll discuss that a little bit. But you also use visuals are often used for behavioral aids. And I want you to make that distinction too, because there's visuals being used for AAC, so that's things like we talked about for like PECs, or a communication board, or a communication book, or a device. But then you have things like visual schedules. You have things like first thens, which I hope everyone's familiar with these things. If you're not, please write in the box and I'll definitely explain it. But visual schedules, first thens, transition visuals, choice boards, rewards, things like that, you're using them as a behavioral aid. It receptively might help them to communicate, but it doesn't allow them to communicate with the world at large, really, right? It's helping to get them the child in a better frame of mind, but it's not necessarily helping them to communicate with everyone around them. So I think that's also something really important to make the distinction of. So one thing, I'm just going to ask everyone to excuse me for 1 second. I left on the table, I left my sample images I want to show you guys. I'm just going to grab it. All right, there we go. All right, sorry about that. All right, so now that we've kind of had a discussion about what AAC is and some questions that I field quite oftenly, I want to discuss, yes, Amy, it hopefully will be, yes, we'll definitely have it on in one form or another. I want to discuss the three main types of AAC. And these can have different names in different places, but I'm going to use particular names and you'll get the idea of what they are. So if you've heard other things, you'll kind of pick up on it. The first one I want to discuss is Knotek. So we've already discussed some forms of Knotek, right? We've discussed signing, well, those early signs. We've discussed gesturing, pointing. Some people like to use colorful sign language. We don't use that with our kids, of course. Writing, drawing, those sorts of things. Those are all forms of Knotek AAC. We've discussed PECs a little bit. PECs is a form of Knotek AAC. Let's show you guys. I'm going to show you guys here. Hopefully everyone can see it. I'm going to show you a communication board, which is a form of Knotek AAC. This is a pretty advanced one. It's got 80 cells on the page. Hopefully, can everyone see that? So this is And you can see it's got a variety of different vocabulary on there. So this, again, is Knotek. The child will communicate by pointing. He will say he wants to eat and drink by pointing to these pictures here, right? So that is another form of Knotek. Now this is a pretty involved one. This is what we call a core vocabulary board, which we'll discuss a little bit more later on. But I'm going to show you, we spoke last week a little bit about one of the things I really like to do is suggest for my parents and families to put things on their fridge or cupboards with preferred items of food, just because food is such a motivator, right? So this one didn't come out that well, but this is a pretty basic, and you can find these online or make them yourselves, which we'll get into in a second, but this is a pretty basic food one, right? There's just a variety of different foods, and it's just to request foods. It's not ideal, mostly because it doesn't have any other vocabulary on it, right? So let's say there's no more on here, so you can't say, well, I want more apple or more bananas. It's just got the thing. And again, you're just pointing, right? If you want bananas, point like that. It's a good first step for a child who, to give them a little bit more freedom by putting this on the fridge. They go to the fridge or the pantry or wherever and then touch something when they want it. So that's a low-tech one. We talked about PECs. Obviously, if you're not familiar with PECs, this is what your kind of basic PEC page will look like. Something like this. And again, PECs is a communication system, but again, it is something that is mostly used for requesting and initiation, and it's really good for those sorts of things. However, when you're trying to get above just requesting, then you want something like this. You maybe don't want 80 cells on this, just because this is more advanced, but look at the difference in the amount of vocabulary on this one, right? And as we'll discuss later, something like this has a variety of different vocabulary types. It's got action words, so like get and make and play. The one thing you'll notice about this, it doesn't really have nouns. And we will definitely keep that in mind, the lack of nouns on this page, because we will discuss that after. The last thing I want to show you, and you may have heard this, and I honestly don't know how big this is in St. John's, but there is something called POD. And POD is, again, an acronym, a lovely acronym for Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display. And what POD is a Knotek communication system in book form. So it's similar to a communication book. But what's neat about POD is, here you go, it's built on pragmatics and semantic branches. And what that means is, you see where it says food here, and there's an 18. So once the child touches 18, then you scroll to page 18. See, this is page 35. He touches 18, and he goes to the page that has food and drink on it. So it's very much that this is like computer pages, right? Internet links, like hyperlinks. Like do 18, and then you scroll to page 18 for it. So those are kind of the main low-tech things. I did put a few resources on low-tech things on the community page. If you guys do want to try out some low-tech things, like I said before, I'm not going to recommend specific high-tech things for you. Low-tech, you can feel free to try out, hopefully using the strategies that you hear tonight. There are two that I really want to point out on there. One is the Texas Autism Circuit. You might think that's a little weird website for me to recommend, but what's really, really good about that website is that they provide lots of, I don't know what the legalities are of it, but lots of really good free resources on there. We talked about behavioral aids. Really, if you need any behavioral aid whatsoever, they have everything on there, which is really cool. And for free, you just download it. And again, I don't know the legalities of it, but I went to a conference and they showed it off, and I went to a conference in Texas. So go ahead and have fun with that. I also posted a page from an autism website that has a number of activity boards. So activity boards are going to be very simple to that food board I showed you. I don't have one here, but it's going to be very simple to that food board, and it'll have various vocabularies for specific activities. So I think I saw one for Play-Doh and one for bubbles and that sort of thing. And that will give you Again, an opportunity to do some modeling and to do some interaction with that. The other website, and I'll mention this again after, where you can find lots of really good low-tech things, is Practical AAC. Practical AAC is like the hub on the internet for anything AAC. So CNN might be the hub for news in the world. Practical AAC is the hub for anything assistive technology or AAC related on the internet. Pretty much anything you're looking for, you type into the search engine, because there are thousands of blogs and posts and resources. Type into the search engine, you'll get videos and communication resources and blog posts. You'll get tons of stuff. So I do suggest if your child is using AAC or you're just interested in AAC, you will get tons of great resources and information using that website. So really do feel free to have a look at that. So we did low tech. The next one I'm going to talk about is light/medium tech. You might hear static. Some places might call it like the static category. But what this category is, it's any piece of actual technology that is that's static. And what I mean by static is it doesn't move. There's no page. Nothing changes. Usually with these types of communication devices, you have to record your own voice on it or record someone else's voice. It doesn't generate speech like that. So I'll show you a couple of things. You might be familiar with these. If you are, great. If not, if you want to know anything more about any of these, feel free to type in the message box. Probably the most popular device of this category is called the Gotalk. And this is the Gotalk. And so there are a number of different Gotalks. There is Gotalk 1, but it really starts from 4. There's Go 4, there's 9, 16, 32, and 32 Express is the newest one. But they're all very similar in that they're all static like this. When you press a button, like if I press crayons here, it's not going to change, but it will say crayons with my voice or whoever recorded it. And usually they have 5 levels, and what I mean by 5 levels is you can record all this vocabulary here. So this one is the Gotalk 9. You can record 9 different vocabulary things here, and then you could take it out, switch levels with these buttons up here, and then put in another one, and it'll have different vocabulary. These 3 up here are called the plus things, and they never change. So, for instance, on this particular device, what is it? It's a thumbs up. I think this is a thumbs up. So that's like probably good. That's probably question or I don't know, and this is thank you. No matter what page is in here, it will always be on those. So this is probably the most popular one that's out there of ones that are more like a communication device. Let me grab, do I have that? I do have it. Here we go. All right. Let's see. So I mentioned Gotalk does, well, here, let's go into this. So there are also a variety of single message devices. And what this is it means it's just got one button that you press and it says. So a lot of people know these. This is called a Big Mac. And again, in this one, you just record a message, depending, I don't know how long they are. I think they're like 30 seconds to a minute. You can record a message and then you press this big button and it says it. This is a step-by-step, or over here, or Little Mac. It's a much smaller one, but again, does the same thing, right? You press it and it'll say something. Some of them actually have multiple levels, so you press it once, it'll say one message, press it again, it'll say another message. And this is Gotalk's single message device here. And this, you just press this little button here and it'll say something. And there are a variety of those. There are a whole bunch of different ones of those. These are really good for, we use these a lot for cause and effect, right? So I press this, it says something. I press this, something happens. We use them for cause and effect. We use them for participation. For instance, during a circle time or something, right? You go around the circle, and then if the child's nonverbal or needs a little bit of help, you can press this to say a part for the circle, something like that. They're really used for that. They can be used for requests. For instance, this one has a visual of drink on here, right there. There we go, right there. So they can be used for stuff like that. The issue with the issue with all of this, with both of these types of things, is they are limited, right? These are especially limited, obviously, because you could just do one thing with them, right? That's very limiting. That's not to say they're good. Also really good for initiation, these things too. These things, while they have a little bit more, like this one, for instance, 5 times 9, so you could have 45 pieces of vocabulary on it. The 32, you could have 5 times 32, so it's like 160. So you can have a fair bit of vocabulary, but they're not as fluid and they're not as dynamic. So they are a little bit limiting. That's not to say that this isn't a great start for some kids. These also, especially for kids who have a little bit of a lighter touch when they're touching a device, or have difficulty accessing a device, something like this might actually be really good because it's got a big thick key guard on it and it's a little bit harder to activate, so you really have to work on that point. So the final group is I'm sure you can figure out, are high-tech devices. And this is where your iPads are and your various other speech-generating devices. And the high-tech group is anything that really involves any kind of computer or tablet. These days, a lot of it's tablets. So let's talk a little bit about iPads. iPads are kind of the big thing now, right? I think you can go into some Apple stores and actually some of their iPads will have a communication app on it. And when used for communication, you have your iPad and then you have your app on it. There are a number of different apps. Show you one here. Here's an iPad with a communication app on it. There. You might have heard ProLocal to Go is kind of one of the big ones. It was the first one out there. Another one is TouchChat, which is another pretty popular one. This page here is actually from one of the TouchChat vocabularies. There. There's something called LAMP, which is a whole different ballgame. We're not even going to talk about it, but that's another fairly popular one in the States. What can I say about apps? One thing that I'm going to go back to my disclaimer. Never, ever, ever, ever get an app without discussing it with a speech therapist and getting a good, solid recommendation. The problem with that is these apps are really expensive. I'm not kidding you when I tell you, ProLocal to Go is $349 or $400 Canadian. When you factor in the price of an iPad, you're dealing with over $1,000, right? So you never want to do this without actually talking to a speech therapist. Another thing, if you are using an iPad with a communication app and you haven't been told this, one thing I will always recommend is that you make sure the iPad has no other apps on it. This is really important because we want the iPad to be the communication, the voice of the child, right? So if you're putting other stuff on it, it can make it a little difficult. So really try your best to do that. I know it can be an expensive ordeal, but if you do already have a communication app, try and make sure there's nothing else on it. There are a number of other things, a number of other communication devices out there. These are called dedicated speech generating devices. And the same with the apps, all these generate their own speech, right? So if you write dog, you put a button with a visual, if there's the visual with dog in there, it will say dog for you. The voices vary in how good they are. Sometimes you want to spring for a bit more realistic voice. Dedicated speech generating devices, again, are always tablets or computers of some sort. And they look very similar to tablets these days. It's usually, and this is, I talked about WAC before, but this is, I believe it's a Windows or a Dell tablet in a case with a speaker. And this comes directly from the manufacturer. And when you're looking at stuff like this, you're looking at, $6,000 and up. So they are really expensive to do, but they are dedicated, and you do get support. When you get an iPad and an app, you don't really get any support. With something like this, you get lots of support, which is nice. But you're paying for it. Let's see, the other thing I want to show you guys. So in addition to, when we are using a dedicated device, or any kind of high-tech device, generally we're accessing it with our finger. So we're touching it with our finger, right? We're touching the iPad with our finger. However, for some kids, that's not possible. They don't have that ability to touch. I'm going to show you some examples, and we call this alternative access because they're using a part of their body other than their fingers to access the device. This one here, and hopefully you can see, but you see there's a switch there, a red button right here. And this boy or person is using his fist to access it because he can't use his finger, so that's how he's making it work. And everything else works the same way, except he's using his fist. Another one which you may have heard about is called an eye gaze. And this girl here, she is using her eyes to access that device, which is probably a computer. It looks like a Toby. She's using her eyes, and this thing underneath here is a camera, and her eyes basically become a mouse. So that's how she uses the computer. So, if you did, the one thing I will suggest if you really want to play around and see what a communication app looks like, there is a free app. I linked to it in the group called Sounding Board. It is free. It's the only one that is free / cheap that's actually, I find, usable from a user standpoint. You could play around with it a little bit. This isn't a recommendation. This is if you just want to mess around and see what it looks like. There's a bit of a learning curve with Sounding Boards. You might have to really play around with it to get an idea about it. But feel free to do that. Totally. And that's also linked in the thing. Now, all of these, as you saw from the pictures I showed you, they all use some sort of visuals to do it, whether they're the computer-based or they're light medium tech, which you'll have to put in your own visuals. I am a firm believer that you can even draw your own visuals if you want, but if it comes down to where you actually want to purchase it, most visuals you see out there will probably be from Boardmaker, which you might have heard of. Again, this isn't a recommendation, just saying I linked to Boardmaker online. Can be pretty expensive if you are looking to buy visuals. Another cheaper option, much cheaper option, is something called Lesson Picks. Again, I also linked to that in there if you want access to a lot of different visuals. Lesson Picks is actually really neat and very reasonably priced, so if it's something you're looking into, just to let you know. So that's kind of a rundown of the different kinds of AAC. I want to spend a little time before we go on. If you have a communication device, now what? Now what do we do? How do we teach a child how to use it? The number one thing, in my opinion, that is most important is what we call presuming competence. And what presuming competence means is that you need to presume that the child is a learner and a communicator, and that he or she will develop the competence to communicate with you. I want you to look at it this way, in that you need to assume that they have the ability to communicate, because 99.99999% of the time, they do have the ability to communicate. It's up to you and up to us, I mean, with the help of a speech therapist, obviously, it's to figure out the tools that work. Right? And honestly, I've gone through some clients who I've had to go through 4, 5, 6, 7 different communication devices with until we found the one that works, but we found the tool that works. So it is really important to always presume competence. And that goes for kiddos who aren't necessarily using AAC. I'm a firm believer that we should always presume competence of our kids. Okay. So, now that we're presuming competence, how can we teach? I'm going to talk to you about two different things. There are a variety of different methods, again, to do it. But these are the two that, when you look into literature, that really come up the most and that I use the most. Number one, and probably the most important strategy you can do when teaching and working with any students who uses AAC, is what we call aided language stimulation. Could be called aided language input. Could have a variety of other different names, but something around, it'll usually be aided language something, or aided something. I posted a really good video in the Blossom group. It's very good. I highly suggest you watch. It's only like 2 minutes on YouTube that explains A language as well. To explain A language, what I'm going to do to you, what I'm going to ask you to do is think back to, you don't remember this obviously, but think back to how you would learn language. How did you learn how to talk? Assuming you're all English watching this, or whatever your first language might be, chances are pretty good that you learned your language from hearing, whether it be your parents, your guardians, any other adults in your environment doing it, right? That's generally how we learn language. We hear other people doing it, we take it in, and then we start to speak it out. However, we don't take in, let's say we're, 9 months, 12 months, a year old. We don't hear French for 12 months, and then by the time we start talking in English, right? If we've heard French for 12 months, we're going to be talking in French. Works the exact same way with any communication system. We have to look at communication systems as languages. So no matter what communication system we're using, whether it be something low tech or no tech like Pod or PEX or whatever, or something high tech like Prolocal to go on an iPad or another app or another program, what we do is we need to provide input the same way that we're expecting it to come out. So we can't just shove an iPad in front of a child and be like, here you go, use it, start talking with it. We have to model and demonstrate on it how they should use it. It works the same way how we learned our language, right? That is the only way they're going to learn. There was a big reason a lot of people in the community don't like something like Prolocal to Go is Prolocal to Go, the app, came out however many years ago, and it had such buzz and everyone was going crazy with it, and a lot of people just bought it and thought magically, oh, the child's going to learn how to speak. To this day, and Proloco, it used to be a really bad app. Now it's actually terrific. It's made a lot of great progress, but to this day there are people who just hate it for that, and they're like, oh, we can't, we tried and we failed and we wasted hundreds of dollars. So it's important to keep that in mind. And it's actually amazing when you think of A language stimulation, actually, if you think how long it took you to learn language and to learn how to be a competent talker, probably took you 4 years. Usually by 4 years we've acquired and use most of the language we're going to use for the rest of our life. I've had clients and we have kids who, after 6 months, they're amazing users of devices. 6 months compared to, it takes the average individual till they're about 4 years old to properly use language. It just goes to show how beneficial A language is and how plastic the brains are of the kids, no matter what their diagnosis is. And I definitely suggest going on to practical AAC if you're interested more in A language. Just doing a search in there, you'll get lots of awesome articles, articles from parents, articles from teachers, articles from SLPs, articles from other professionals. Definitely worth looking at some of those videos. You'll learn a lot. But the key for A language is you want to model this and use it the same way that you're expecting the child to use it. Very similar to what we talked about last week. In fact, when we do therapy with kiddos who are using AAC, there is no difference. There should never be any difference between what you're working on with a verbal and a nonverbal kid. The only difference is one is using the voice and one is using a device. The other thing to talk about is core vocabulary. So, what core vocabulary is there have been tons of studies on, I will answer your question. Okay, let me answer Jennifer's question about hand over hand. Generally, you would never do, for AAC, what the literature says now is you should not do hand over hand unless you're teaching specific motor patterns. So, what I mean by specific motor patterns is if you're trying to teach where a specific button is, you could potentially do hand over hand or probably hand under hand. But you want to get away from that prompt as quickly as possible. Really the reason you're doing the modeling and the aided language input is because that is giving the student access to all the vocabulary. That being said, there are ways around that. So instead of doing what I always suggest, and what I think most therapists will suggest, is that instead of doing something like hand over hand, and let's say I have this. I'm not saying I would always have this, but let's say this is on an iPad, this page, but they're really struggling with it, right? So what I would do here, instead of doing, let's say I'm trying to get eat to work, and I want the child to say eat. What I would do instead of doing hand over hand for eat is I would hide, let's say, 95% of these buttons, so that, let's say, what would be most important? So that's like eat, stop, go, and my were visible. Everything else was black, right? So that what that would do is it would eliminate all of these, and it would focus them in on the eat. And when you're hiding buttons versus doing hand over hand, what's nice is that whenever you make the buttons reappear, everything else will be in the same spot, like that. The other problem with hand over hand is that you don't want it to be something where you're controlling what the child is saying, right? So that would be equivalent to me going to someone and going like this, say more, like this, right? So I'm just doing this and forcing them to say that. So that's where you kind of get into trouble with the whole hand over hand. That being said, if you are working on a specific motor pattern, you can do some hand over hand, although I would usually suggest hand underhand. So like this or like this, just because that's a little less intrusive than going like this. Okay? And again, your therapist, your SLP or occupational therapist or whoever you're working with would be more the person to ask about, like, if we have to learn any specific motor patterns for something. Hopefully that answers your question, Jennifer. All right, so let me get on to core vocabulary because it's really the last thing I have today. Is that, so core vocabulary, there have been a number of studies on toddlers, and there's a whole bunch of different core vocabulary lists, but the most common language that they use. And what these studies have found is that in pretty much all the toddlers, there are specific sets of words that they use, and after 4 years old, these words continue to be used more and more as they get older. And basically this is one of the bigger lists. Aside from up here, which are categories, everything else are really, this is a big core vocabulary list and one of the bigger ones, right? And the reason you're teaching core vocabulary versus nouns, and when I say nouns, I'm talking about like ball and cookie and things like that. The reason you're teaching core vocabulary versus nouns is because you're getting more bang for your buck. So, if I teach a child go, just go, which is one of my favorite ones to teach, you can use go. Think of how many situations you can use the word go. You could say, you can use it in go fast, go slow, go to bed, go to the store, go home, go away. That word go can be used in 10 different situations, probably more. Versus if you have 10 nouns, each one of those could probably be used obviously for just one thing, right? So you have 10 words to use for 10 different things, but with go, you have one word that you can use for 10 different things. So you get a lot more bang for your buck by teaching language that way, right? That's to say you still do use nouns, right? Because that's stuff that's important to the kiddo. But in terms of, again, using language in different ways, you do want to teach core vocabulary because nouns can really only be used for requesting. Right? You're generally just going to be using nouns for requesting, and language is a lot more about sorry. Language is more than about just requesting, right? So it's about commenting, it's about social interactions, it's about protesting, and I could go on and on. It's about a whole bunch of different things, and you want a child to be able to do those things. And from core vocabulary, you're getting a little bit more of that by being able to teach language in by being able to teach that certain words can be used in a variety of different situations. So that's why I would always say if you are using it, you do want to use core vocabulary as much as possible. And again, if you are on Practical AAC, definitely look into that. Google core vocabulary, you'll see. Same thing on actually if you want YouTube or Pinterest. You plug Pinterest here. If you put in core vocabulary, you'll get lots of great ideas about core vocabulary low-tech boards that you can find, and you'll see lots of awesome videos. I wish I had a device here to show you guys, but I don't. But lots of really good ideas around core vocabulary from YouTube and Pinterest are really good. So I know that was a lot of information. I do suggest that you have a look at those websites I put if you are curious a little bit more. Again, I want to give you a disclaimer that I do not recommend using any form of, high or even medium or low tech device without consulting with an SLP. I also want to suggest that if you are interested in this type of thing with an SLP, that you actually find out how comfortable they are with it. As someone who kind of specializes in this and has had his own practicum students and people who are working in it, I would definitely say that not everybody is comfortable with it. And you really don't get much of it in school. You get like one course, and it's not a very good course usually, right? So I would definitely say to post some questions to them to find out how comfortable they are. As an aside, and I don't know if Amy or Ali may have mentioned this already, I am also working on getting my license for Newfoundland and Labrador, so I will hopefully early in September have that all taken care of. And then I will, if people are interested, I know you can get my cards and information more, and I'll tell you at the end, you can contact me and we can potentially look at doing some consultation or online training around that as well. I will answer your question, Jennifer. I just want to say if there are any other questions, please feel free to type in here. You can also, here's my visual. You guys remember, this is the website, www.accessible.slp.com, ACCESSIBLE, SLP.com. You can email me at, I'm going to put it in here, but it's accessibleslp@gmail.com. There we go, I'll put it in there. You can email me there if you don't want to put your question in here. As I mentioned last week, as long as it's okay with Amy and Ali, you can also just post in the group, especially if you feel like it's something that might help everyone. Or for those of you who aren't here, technical issues tonight, you can post in the group and I can definitely answer them. Or if you don't feel comfortable, you can email me directly. So if you do have any questions now, though, feel free to post it. Jennifer's question was, if your child has issues understanding pictograms as they are abstract, how would you teach that? So that's when you might want to look at something like digital images instead of those your typical board maker ones. Do digital images work better? Do a different type of pictures, right? A lot of people are familiar with just PCS, which is the company that kind of makes them, but there are a variety of other images out there that can be used. Generally, I am actually a firm believer that it shouldn't really matter what it is, what the picture is, because all it is a visual representation of something. You're just teaching that this particular thing, unless there are some vision issues or can't remember offhand, but there is a learning disability that affects how you perceive pictures. Unless there's something like that, you're just building an association that this particular thing, this here, means that this is my website, or that this is me, or whatever. That's all it is, right? That's all it means. I could have said this is a dog and worked and taught you that this is a dog, and you would probably eventually believe that this is a dog, right? At some point, because I'd be harping it home so much, right? So I am a firm believer in that. That being said, there definitely is research and has shown that some children with autism do benefit pretty well from having digital images versus non-digital images. Some children with autism, especially if they're really into words and numbers, prefer no image at all and just words. Right? I have clients who our communication devices are just words. There's nothing else on it. I have ones that we just use to type. They won't even use that. They're great spellers, and we just spell to communicate. So that's what's really important, is what works, and it's just teaching. It's teaching a representation of what it is. Hopefully that makes sense. The one other thing, actually, now that I remind myself, since there aren't any questions, and we've had a bunch of people kind of get kicked out or have technical problems, but before we take off is something to also consider is visual scenes, or our visual scenes. And there definitely is some research behind that individuals with autism benefit more from individual scenes, from digital scenes and visual scenes versus pictures. And the reason, and what I mean by visual scene is, I'm trying to think. So let's say you have a picture of your living room, right? It's just a picture of your living room. You have your couch, your TV, your coffee table. And you can do this electronically on most communication apps and devices. Is I have that picture of my living room, and then I program that when I touch the couch, it says couch. When I touch the TV, it says TV. When I touch the coffee table, it says coffee table. And that's a visual scene, basically, is because you have the digital image. And part of that is because it is digital, and it's also more salient, right? Because that's a couch. That's an actual couch. That's my couch. I touch that. It should say couch. So that's also something you can look into. There, most communication apps do have digital scenes, and also there are some really good. Maybe I'll put them in the thing. There are some apps specifically for digital scenes. So maybe I'll put some links in the Blossom blog on that post I made earlier. So I think we have 5 people here. Does anyone have any other questions while I'm here, while you have me? I'll just give one more minute because I know last week there was a bit of a lag, and So I have been able to record the whole thing so far in QuickTime. So if there are any issues like last week, hopefully there won't be, but if this post goes missing, I should have everything and I won't have to record it, which is re-record it, which is exciting. All right, I'm just going to read Emily's post here and then we'll talk. Response group divisions. So one thing I would be curious about, Emily, is have you tried, let's say, and again, this can be tricky for a speech therapist because like I mentioned, what you're describing are behavioral aids, right? But one thing I would I don't know if have you tried mixing the two? So for instance, I'm thinking, let's say, so you have a visual schedule and it's going in the car, or let's say going in the car, going to the store, buying whatever, going in the car, going home, taking off your shoes, going on the couch. So you're mixing the two. I'm curious, I don't know if you've tried something like that as well. So if it's working outside, and a lot of times what happens here is that, they just make that association that this is something that only works outside, or that this is something that's only for school. I'm not doing this at home. This is where you might want to just try, let's say you're using a visual schedule outside, and it's working really well, but not in the house. This is where you might want to try one in the house, but one that's completely different. That doesn't look anything like the one you're doing outside, right? So let's say you're doing outside your typical visual, and it's got digital images. Maybe the one inside you just draw. You just do stick figures, or you download images off the internet and put it on a completely different color paper and put it on a completely different way. Make sure it looks nothing like the one you're using outside. Because right now there's that association that the one outside is for outside. I'm not going to use this inside. This makes no sense. This makes no sense to me. Why should I be using this inside? That might be worth something to try as well. That brings me to another point. We do this fairly frequently with kids who have multiple iPads, right? Like I mentioned before, when you are using a communication device, you don't necessarily want to use the same device for games and for communication. So sometimes what we'll have to do is we'll have to bling out one of their iPads so it looks nothing like their communication iPad, or vice versa. Something else you can try is and if you, Emily, if you either email me or post in the form, in the Blossom community form, I will send you the names of them after. But there are a number of digital, like visual schedules, digital first ends, all those sorts of things. So that could be an option too, especially if he likes technology or if he's into technology. So you could definitely try something like that too. I could post them. And yes, totally. If he can read and loves reading, use reading. Yes. As soon as the kids I work with, as soon as they get reading and they can read, and they usually most kids with autism, as soon as they learn how to read, they love reading. Yes, definitely try with only words. Totally. The nice thing about using only words too is you can do it in real time, right? So you can do it as you go along. So maybe try in the house. Try with just words. Totally. Yeah. Big fan of doing words. One thing we always say, any kid using any kind of communication, AAC, our ultimate goal, whether it happens or not, that doesn't matter. That's inconsequential. But our ultimate goal is always to teach kids who use AAC how to spell and how to write. Because no matter how great your communication device is, and some of them, like I mentioned some that have, like Touch Chat and Proloco, they have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of words in there. But no matter how good your app is, you can't say every word. But you can say every word with the letters of the alphabet. So ultimately, and I probably should mention that earlier, ultimately our goal is to always teach kids how to spell. Really is super important. All right, so thank you guys for coming. I know there were some technical issues tonight, but I really appreciate it. Hopefully the rest of you who watch this later will enjoy it. It went a bit long, but I told you I really do have a passion for this, and I could talk, honestly, I could talk all night about this and not stop until I go hoarse. But like I said, if there are any other questions, feel free to contact me. Yeah, have an awesome night, everyone. Thank you.